Today we're going to be working on the daily bag pattern, which I'm super excited to share with you. The pattern has multiple different views, so there's lots of versatility. We've got an option with a bow where you can attach it or detach it depending on your preference for the day. We also have two different strap options, so you can tie a bow at the shoulder or you can just have a fixed strap option. For today's tutorial, I'm going to be doing the fixed strap with the detachable bow. I'm also going to be using a cotton canvas. It's on the lighter weight side, so I'm also going to be interfacing the canvas. If you're using something that's heavyweight, you do not have to interface, and I will be only interfacing the lining of the bag. The reason that I'm doing this is because I want to make sure that the bag is going to be able to withstand all of the things that I'm going to put inside of it. I'm probably going to be carrying things like a water bottle and my laptop inside there, so I want to make sure that it has that sturdy structure that it needs to carry heavy items. So if your fabric is going to be on the lighter weight side, I highly recommend interfacing, but again, if you're using something like a denim or a canvas that's on the heavier weight side, you can totally skip the interfacing. In terms of interfacing, I'm going to be using this mid-weight interfacing from Pelon, which I use all the time and I highly recommend it. And then for the fabric, I'm going to be using this beautiful striped canvas and I'm super excited about it. I'm going to start by piecing together my pattern and then we're going to get right into this tutorial. This pattern, along with all of my other sewing patterns, comes with 3 different file types. A print-at-home file, which is what I'm using right now, a projector file for those of you who have projectors for sewing, and a large format file for anyone who wants all of their pattern pieces on one big page. I have an ultra short throw projector for projecting sewing patterns, but today I decided to print and tape my pattern. Partially because I enjoy the process, and also because I like having a hard copy of patterns that I plan to use a lot. I honestly find the process of piecing together a paper pattern really therapeutic, and it helps me slow down and enjoy the process more. After piecing together my entire pattern, it was time to cut out all of the pattern pieces. And once that was done, I moved straight into cutting out my fabric. With any sewing pattern, the cutting process takes time. I like to spend this time listening to music or a podcast, or even listening to YouTube videos in the background. I'm obviously not watching them as I cut, but having YouTube videos playing in the background feels like hanging out with a friend while you're sewing, which I absolutely love. Now, if you're using 2 separate fabrics, one for the outer of the bag and one for the lining of the bag, I highly recommend pre-washing your fabric. The reason this matters if you're using 2 different fabrics is because different fabric types shrink at different rates in the wash, so you'll want to make sure that you get all of the shrinkage out before sewing the bag together. That said, if you're using all one fabric type, I wouldn't worry about pre-washing. At first, I planned to make the entire bag out of one fabric, but while I was cutting, I decided against it for 2 reasons. One, because I wanted you to easily tell which fabric was the outer and which fabric was the lining for the purposes of this tutorial. But 2, I selfishly wanted to save as much of this lovely canvas as possible in hopes that I would have enough fabric left over to make the Joni jacket pattern by Small Museum. Now, when I got to the point of cutting out my lining fabric, I decided to block fuse my interfacing to the fabric before cutting out all of the pattern pieces. Block fusing is a method where a large piece of fabric is fused to a piece of fusible interfacing before cutting out all of the individual pattern pieces. It stabilizes the entire piece of fabric, ensuring that all of the pattern pieces that are cut from it are all uniform in size and shape. To apply fusible interfacing, you want the rough glue side of the fusible to face the wrong side of the fabric. Then, on a low heat setting, press and hold your iron over every section of the interfacing for at least 15 seconds. It's honestly a pretty tedious process, but if you don't iron each section long enough, the glue won't properly adhere to the fabric and the interfacing may peel away from the fabric over time. Now, once the pattern pieces are all cut out, it's time to start assembling the bag. We're going to start by taking our pocket pattern pieces and folding the raw edge under by 3/8 of an inch and pressing it in place. Then we're going to fold it under another 3/8 of an inch and press it in place so that the raw edge is completely enclosed. I like to use a seam gauge for precision, but to be honest, it's not super important that this is precise, so feel free to eyeball it if you'd like. Also, if you're curious, I got my seam gauge from Wawak, and I highly recommend them. This seam gauge is a lot sturdier than other ones that I've purchased in the past, so it's just going to last a lot longer and it doesn't bend and fold like some of my other ones. Now we're going to take both of our pocket pieces over to our sewing machine and top stitch the folded edge in place. I also want to note that the construction for the lining is exactly the same as the construction for the outer bag, so I'll be doing them at the same time, and sometimes you might see me working on the lining while other times I'm working on the outer, but no need to worry since the steps are exactly the same.
Next up, we're going to grab two of our main panel pattern pieces, one of the lining and one of the outer. Then we're going to line up the edges of our pockets with the edges of the main panel. Make sure that when you do this, the wrong side of the pocket is facing the right side of the main panel. We're going to want to pin all around the edges of the pocket to secure it in place. Once it's all pinned in place, it's time to edge stitch the side and the bottom of the pocket to the main panel. If you're unfamiliar with edge stitching, it's just sewing a straight stitch close to the edge of the fabric. I typically do this at 1/4 of an inch, but the width doesn't really matter as long as it's smaller than your seam allowance, which in this case is 3/8 of an inch. Now we're going to divide the pocket into two compartments by sewing a straight stitch down the center. I like to fold my bag in half and make a visible crease to follow. I also like to put pins at the top and the bottom of the crease just so that I know where to start and end. Again, this is one of those things that you can easily just eyeball if you want to, but the pins are super helpful as a guide. Then we're simply going to take it over to our sewing machine and sew it in place. Once that's done, we're going to grab our bottom panel and our side panels. Just for visual reference, I'm going to orient them around the bag the way that they're going to get sewn down. The bottom panel attaches to the bottom of the bag, and the two side panels attach to the sides of the bag. But before we sew the panels to the bag, we're actually going to sew them to each other first. So with the right sides together, we're going to place the short edges of the side panels to the short edges of the bottom panel. Then we're going to bring it over to our sewing machine and sew them together with a 3/8 of an inch seam allowance. After they've been sewn together, we're going to bring them over to our ironing station and iron the seam allowances open. This will help reduce bulk at the corners of the bag and make it easier for your machine to sew through. Now we're going to pin the long edge of the bottom panel to the bottom edge of the main panel. I like to put one pin in the middle and one pin on either end. Then we're going to take it over to our sewing machine and we're going to sew it with a 3/8 of an inch seam allowance. Once that's done, this is what it should look like. We're then going to do the exact same thing to the side panels. So we'll take each side panel, place it on top of the main panel so the long edges are matching each other, and then we're going to pin it in place. I like to start by putting one pin at the top, then one pin at the bottom, before pinning everything else in between. Once we've done this to both sides, we're going to bring it back to our sewing machine and sew them together with a 3/8 of an inch seam allowance. After all three sides are sewn together, we're going to press the seam allowance towards the side panels and the bottom panel. This is going to make the edges of the bag nice and crisp and feeling very professional. Now it's time to grab the other main panel and finish off the body of the bag. We'll start by pinning the bottom panel to the bottom edge of the main panel, just like we did last time. Then we'll take it to our sewing machine and sew it together with a 3/8 of an inch seam allowance. Then we will once again pin each side panel to the sides of the main panel and sew them together with a 3/8 of an inch seam allowance. Now it's time to take our bags over to our ironing station and iron the seam allowances towards the side panels and the bottom panel. I like to use this little sleeve pressing board that I have, but you can also use the edge of your ironing station. I just find that this sleeve board is easier to use because it's narrower than the corner of an ironing board. I found mine secondhand at an estate sale, so they're pretty easy to get your hands on if you don't already have one. At this point, you should have a fully constructed outer bag and a fully constructed lining bag. The next step is to sew the outer bag and the lining together. To do this, we're going to take our lining bag and flip it so that the right sides are facing out. This may take a bit of finessing, but once it's done, we're simply going to insert the lining bag into the outer bag. Again, this might take a little bit of finessing to get the bags to fit nicely inside of each other. Then we're going to pin the curved edges of the bag together. I recommend starting at the corners, perfectly matching up the seam allowances and pinning them in place. Then match up those curved edges and pin it all the way around. On one side, we're going to sew the entire curved edge together with a 3/8 inch seam allowance, but on the other side, we're going to sew about halfway through the curve and backstitch. Then we're going to leave a 4 to 5 inch gap and sew the rest of the curve together. The reason that we're doing this is because we need an opening to turn the bag right sides out, and the side openings where the straps are going to go are a bit too small to comfortably pull the bag through. Now that the bags are sewn together, we're going to clip into the seam allowance of the curved edge about every 1/2 of an inch. The goal is to get close to the seam without cutting through it, and the reason we're doing this is because it will ensure that the curved edge lays nice and flat. After all those snips are in place, we're going to reach through the gap that we left and flip the bag so that the right sides are facing out. This should be fairly easy if you left a large enough gap, but if it feels difficult, feel free to seam rip the opening a bit bigger so that you don't have to struggle your way through this process. After the bag is flipped right sides out and the lining is on the inside of the bag, we're going to iron the curved edges in place. While we're doing this, we'll also want to press the gap that we left so that the raw edge is facing the interior of the bag. For the gap, I like to first press the lining inward by 3/8 of an inch. Then flip the outer fabric in, making sure that the lining fabric stays on the inside and doesn't peek out. Now we're going to fold the raw edges of the bag in by 3/8 of an inch and press it in place. We're going to want to do this on both sides so that all of the raw edges are completely enclosed. This is where we're going to insert our straps in a future step. At this point, our bag is really starting to look like a bag. If you're following along, you should pat yourself on the back because your bag is looking stunning. Now let's make those straps. I'm making the fixed strap, but the bow straps are almost exactly the same steps. For the fixed strap, we're going to lay the pattern pieces on top of each other with right sides facing each other. Then we're going to pin all along the long edges on both the top and the bottom of the strap. After that, we're going to take it to our sewing machine and sew it with a 3/8 of an inch seam allowance. Next up, we're going to turn the fixed strap right sides out. The strap is wide enough that you should be able to easily do this with just your hands. However, if you'd prefer, you can also use a loop turner or attach a safety pin to the edge so that you have something to pull through the tube. Then we're going to take our strap over to our ironing station and press it in place so that the entire strap is nice and crisp. Once our strap is pressed, we're going to insert the raw edges of the straps into the openings of the bag by 3/8 of an inch and pin it in place. If you're sewing the fixed strap, this is a great opportunity to throw your bag over your shoulder and see if you like the strap length. I typically wear my bag across my body, and the length of the strap is perfect for that. So I'm going to go ahead and top stitch the straps down on both sides. You should also take this opportunity to admire the bag that you've made because it's turning out so beautiful. Now we still have that leftover gap, but don't worry, we're going to close it up right now. Let's start by pinning that gap closed, being sure that the lining stays on the lining side and doesn't peek out the front. Then we're going to top stitch all the way around the fixed strap and the curved edge of the bag on both sides. You can start and stop your stitch wherever you'd like, but I like to start somewhere along the strap. For the top stitching, I prefer to stay close to the edge, so for me that ends up being a 1/4 inch seam allowance. If you prefer a larger seam allowance, that totally works as well. If you're not sewing the optional bow detail, congratulations, you've finished your bag and it's time to celebrate. If you are sewing the bow, we have just a few more steps. Let's start by grabbing the bow main pattern piece. Fold it in half lengthwise with right sides together and pin it all the way along that long edge. Then we're going to take it over to our sewing machine and sew it with a 3/8 of an inch seam allowance. Next up, we're going to take the bow main and flip it right sides out. Then we're going to bring it over to our ironing station and iron the long edges in place. Once that's done, we also want to fold in the raw edges by 3/8 of an inch. It might take a bit of playing around with to get the corner to look nice and pointy, but once you do, you're going to press it in place. After that, let's take the bow main back to our sewing machine and top stitch the diagonal edges that we just pressed inwards. The bow main is officially prepped, and now it's time to work on the bow center. Let's take the bow center and fold it in half lengthwise, right sides facing each other. Then we're going to sew the long edges together with a 3/8 of an inch seam allowance. After it's sewn, we want to flip the bow center right sides out. Since the tube is smaller than the other ones that we've made, it might be more difficult to turn. I still find that I can do it with my hands, but if you can't, feel free to use a loop turner or a safety pin. Then simply press the bow center in place, and it's time to construct the bow. This step requires a bit of hand sewing, but I promise it's not too bad. Let's start by taking the prepared bow main and crisscrossing the ends so that they overlap in the middle. Then, if I scrunch the bow down the center and wrap the bow center around it, you can see how this is going to form a bow. Now let's thread the needle so that we can scrunch the bow center together with hand stitching. We're basically just going to weave the needle in and out of the bow main straight through the center. Once we've done this, we'll want to tie a knot at the end so that when we pull the thread, the bottom doesn't pull all the way through. As we pull the thread, the bow main will scrunch down, forming the shape of the bow. Then we're going to wrap the tail ends of the thread in loops around the bow before tying it off. Next, we're going to wrap the bow center around the bow main. On the back side, we'll fold the raw edges of the bow center towards the inside of the bow. Once you're happy with it, pin the bow center in place. Then we're simply going to hand stitch the bow center together. I made mine using an invisible stitch just out of force of habit, but since this one is on the back side of the bow, it'll never be seen, so that's not actually necessary. Feel free to do a quick little hand stitch, tie off the ends, and officially finish sewing the bow. Now for a removable bow, use safety pins to pin the bow to the bag. I like to do one in the center and one on either side of the bow loops. If you prefer to have a fixed bow, you can hand stitch it in place.
Congratulations, your daily bag is officially finished and super, super cute. I hope you guys love this bag as much as I do. I'm definitely gonna get tons and tons of use out of it, especially since the bow is removable. I can just take it off if I don't want so much of a statement with the rest of my outfit. It's also super fun to have the bow on, especially if I'm gonna wear something that's a little bit understated. That way the bag is like what brings the drama to the outfit, but if I'm feeling a little bit more pared back and don't want the attention that the bow might bring, then I can simply take it off. Super easy. I really hope you enjoyed this tutorial, and I hope that your daily bag gets daily use. Thank you so much for being here, and I will see you in the next one.